I'm Eyal Zisser. I'll be the chair of this panel. I'm the dean of the Faculty of Humanities at Tel Aviv University, and today the website of my faculty was visited by hackers who wanted to observe, celebrate, 9/11, but probably radical Islamists, but will not discuss cyber wars, but Syria, and 9/11 is also a day to remember in Syria, the birthday of President Bashar al-Assad, and as we'll probably see during our panel, he has a lot of reason to celebrate today, because whether there will be a limited strike or there will be no strike at all, we might remember this day as the end of at the beginning of the end of the Syrian revolution. But we are not there yet, and the war is going on, and Syria, that's what we are being told, is to become a world center for jihadists, a major threat. As I think former deputy director of the CIA put it, Iran is a source of concern for us. Syria is a major source of threat for us. So this is indeed the case. We have 5 panelists who will discuss those important issues for the world, clearly for the United States, for Israel. Each will be given 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll make sure, we'll use Syrian methods to make sure that they will not speak longer, and then I'm sure we'll be left with time for discussion. The first speaker, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, who is a scholar of Arabic literature and lecturer at Bar-Ilan University, former IDF intelligence officer and director of the Center for the Study of the Middle East and Islam at Bar-Ilan University. I know Moti for many years. He wrote his dissertation on Syria, and we are all eager to listen to him and to hear his lecture on Syria, a new hub for terror. Moti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my friend, colleague for many years, and teacher. I took course with Eyal in the framework of my PhD, and I still consider myself as his student. When we come to talk today about Syria, I'm afraid that Syria is entering the same shelf or the same drawer as Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, all those states which were once states and dissolved to other states, to other groups, to other things. And of course, we all remember those states, but nobody talks today about Soviet Union as a one unit or Yugoslavia. Whoever talks about this could be that he fell asleep some 20-something years ago and didn't wake up yet. I think that Syria, with good large steps, walks into this group of states, disseminating states, mainly because of what happens inside Syria today, which is the jihad against anything which resembles law and order. I would even say that if I put aside my Jewish, Israeli, Zionist entity, I would say, yes, that the Assad regime faces a wave of terror. Wave of terror. And I think that if we talk in an objective way, we cannot overcome. We cannot go around this point. Yes, they are facing an international influx of jihadists. I'll just show you a few things which are on the net. Everybody can see them and understand them. Now, this picture, which starts... Let there be... Where are the days of the overhead projector? Those were the days, my friend. Okay. This is the clip. I don't know why the sound doesn't work. Remember the overhead projector? Just look at the scenes. How these jihadists are fighting, and of course they are covering the faces so nobody can locate them. And this is actually what happens inside a state, the state named Syria today. I'm not sure that Britain would allow such a thing to happen inside Britain or France or any normal state, yet Syria has to face this and to suffer from these foreigner jihadists who came, and I'll show you their faces so you see them well. This is how they act, this is how they train, and we'll continue with what happens there. Just look at the faces of those people. You'll recognize them. This guy is a Belgian. He was born, apparently, Christian, converted to Islam, and some 100 only from Belgium came to Syria to fight against Assad. Some 300 from France, 200 around from Britain. Okay, those who were born Christian, converted to Islam, and came to Syria to take part in the mayhem. These guys from Australia. These guys are from Bahrain, Belgium, Chechnya, Denmark. Somebody would say, he looks like Jesus Christ. Of course, with a difference, big difference. Egypt, France, this guy on the right is the same guy who is with a head cover near the Eiffel. This guy is from Germany. Was from Germany. Great Britain. Could be Pakistani, ex-Pakistani. These are from Indonesia, who are also to be found in Syria today. Why not? There are many Muslims in there. Iraq, of course. Ireland, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon. Lebanon contributes to both sides. Hezbollah fights with Assad, and the Sunnis are going to Syria to fight against Assad. Libyans, Norway. Pakistan, Palestine, of course. Russia, Saudi Arabia. No, this is also somebody who once was. Somalia, Tunisia, Turkey, UAE, United Arab Emirates. USA also contributes to the effort, Yemen, and so forth. So definitely, this is some kind of international effort to topple Assad, and too many are involved in this who came from all over the world. And who will chase them out when the war ends? They came to stay there. If they go back to their own countries, they'll be put in jail, and nobody, would willingly go to jail in England if he can afford it. Why should he? Some other pictures. This is a Chechnyan guy, redhead. I think in the left, he is not also a Syrian. But they have no problem to appear in front of the cameras because they don't hide anything. This is the flag of one of the factions, which I'll talk about later. These two brothers are Jean-Daniel and Nicolas. They came from France. Jean-Daniel and Nicolas, I'm not sure that they were born Muslims, but still they are in Syria. Another group, which is Chechens, works near Homs. This, I'll spare you the movie. Live Leak gives this movie for, it's very easy to get it. This is an event where a Chechnyan, not Chechnyan, an Afghani Taliban guy is slaughtering, beheading 3 Syrians. This is one of them. See, this is his neck. Some minutes later, his head will be departed from his shoulders. Another one is here, and another one is this one. This one is another one. And he beheads them in front of the cameras. Of course, he speaks in one of the Afghani languages, and he has no problem with this. To show the whole world how he came all the way from Afghanistan in order to slaughter the infidels of Assad, those who work with him. So this is actually what happens in Syria, a state which is dissolved. Look, this is the daily scene in many streets, in many places, in many neighborhoods in Syria. When gangs are running around, first of all, they shoot you, then look, and they don't only have light weapons. This is a heavy machine gun. You don't want to mess with such a guy who holds it from the other side. This is the most atrocious thing. This guy, well known, he was filmed tearing one of the soldiers, Assad soldiers' chest after he was killed, taking out his heart in order to eat it in front of the camera. And he did. So, of course, there are the movies which those who are eager to see the movies can see them online. This allegedly, or as it was published, a group of Syrian soldiers waiting to be shot at by jihadists who came to this place. Later, investigation found out that there are no Syrian soldiers. They are another group of jihadists who do not share the same idea as those who are with the weapons. So they were executed by the other jihadists. Means that those groups, the jihadi groups, are fighting each other in addition to fighting Assad. And this is the Syrian scene, and this could be one of the good reasons that Assad still survives, because his enemies actually are fighting each other in many cases. Another phenomenon of lawlessness, and so this, and of course the Quran, which is behind the whole thing, of course, according to the interpretation of every jihadist for his version of interpretation for the Quran. Syria today is torn, I would say roughly, between 3 kinds of groups, of fighting groups. By the way, there are hundreds of militias in Syria today. Hundreds. Every neighborhood has its own militia to defend it. In villages, if they remained, after all, 7 million people were displaced in Syria. 2 million are around the country, 5 million inside the country, according to all kinds of estimations by United Nations and other organizations. The destruction, or total destruction in Syria, or almost total destruction, at least in some places, definitely sends people to exile even inside their own country. However, these hundreds of militias are roughly divided between 2 or 3 kinds. One kind could be branded as the Free Syrian Army, which is also a group of militias, and the connection between all these militias is very weak. They have some kind of cooperation. They could carry out some big actions by cooperating and cooperating between all kinds of groups, but still on the level of the country, definitely they are acting. Good morning, Stephen. There is a chair here. Sorry. It's okay. So they function, they are called the Free Syrian Army, yet they function in very separate places, in separate groups, not always coordinated. Yet their agenda is Syrian. Many of them are not even Muslims. Many of them are Christians, Alawis even, who defected from the Assad gang and crossed the lines. Many of them are ex-soldiers who ran away from the army and joined the Free Syrian Army. Of course, many of them are Muslims, but Islam is not what motivates them. Islam is not their goal, and their goal is not to build an Islamic state on the ruins of Syria, because Islam is not their agenda. Many of them are also Druze, so definitely Islam is not their issue. They are, I would say, super religious or anti-religious or non-religious, call it as you like, because religion is not their issue. Their issue is to take to chase out Assad in a way or another and to build normal Syria, hopefully united, consolidated as it was until March of 2011, and continue life in Syria in like a normal state. The West is trying to support them, yet they are not the only actor on the arena. The second group of groups of militias are local militias associated with the Islamists. I would say they are the grandchildren of the Muslim Brotherhood of the 70s and the 80s, which were crushed by Assad the father, and their children, whether biological children or ideological children, are fighting today in order to establish a Muslim Brotherhood state in Syria, consolidated, nice, which will live in peace with Turkey, with Jordan, with others, as the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood is everywhere when they exist. They, of course, have to resort to violence because of the regime, and although they were crushed some 30 years ago. This, I would say, the second kind of Islamic groups in Syria, which are Islamists, yet their goal is to build a state, a normal state, which will function like a normal state in the world, yet Islamic. The third group is what we saw here, the jihadists or the international jihadists who came from maybe 40 or 50 states in the world, from east and west, even from Indonesia, as we saw. They don't talk about Syria. They talk about the Sham. Sham means the area, or the whole area, which includes what today Syria is, and Lebanon, and the land of Israel, and Jordan as well. And they don't recognize the legitimacy of those states which were created by the colonialism, which marked the borders of this region illegally and without any legitimacy against Islam, because Islam sees the whole region as an Islamic region, regardless of the borders which were marked by the French, British, or others. So they, first of all, don't recognize the existence, even the existence of a state which is called Syria. They don't want to preserve Syria. They want, of course, to liberate the Muslims of the Sham, and this is why they, Jabhat al-Nusra, for example, one of those organizations, the full name of Jabhat al-Nusra is Jabhat al-Nusra li Ahl al-Sham, means the the support front of the Sham people. Sham means Beirut and Jerusalem and Amman as well. Means when they, as they say, when they will finish with the mouth of Damascus, they will go to catch the rat of Beirut. Meaning Hassan Nasrallah, of course, because he's Shiite. Okay? So this is their agenda. Super national, I would say regional at least. By the way, the Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb al-Arabi means the North Africa also do not recognize the states Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya. They don't recognize the borders because they see Al-Maghreb al-Arabi, means the western part of the Arab world, as their arena. And the same thing with Al-Qaeda-like organizations in Saudi Arabia. They talk about Al Jazeera, Jazeerat al-Arab, means the peninsula of the Arabs. They, again, do not recognize the borders which Britain drew in the Arab Peninsula. So, first of all, they want to abolish all the remains of the colonialism. Secondly, the colonialism, of course, the Alawis, which were empowered by the French and where they were given the weapons and later the military and later the country. In Syria, they have to be slaughtered because they are infidels. As you might know, the Alawis are idol worshippers. They are not Muslims, of course. They are connected to the Shia, and the result, they are these organizations of the international jihadists who came to Syria. Their goal is to build another Afghanistan until the end of 2001. A terror state which will export terror wherever they can in order to spread Islam all over the world according to their agenda. This is Syria today. And if they take Syria, if they succeed to take Syria, first of all, they will fight each other, as we see. But in addition to fighting each other, they definitely might be a very big headache to the whole world. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Moti. Well. What should be done about it? What can be done about it? Yeah, those of us who, but I guess you can hear me. Those of us who listen carefully to President Obama haven't got a clear answer, but I believe now we'll get the answer. So it's my privilege to introduce Colonel David Brown. The U.S. Army is a designated Army strategist who holds a BA in philosophy, a diploma from the Defense Language Institute, Monterey, for studies in the Greek language, a diploma from the Army Command and General Staff College, an MS from Long Island University in counseling and leader development. He served for over 29 years, field artillery units, variety of command and staff position in the United States and overseas. His operational experience included nuclear weapons. I hope we'll not get to it in Syria, but other combat experience in the Desert Storm, frequent visit to Bosnia and Kosovo, and operational planning experience at battalion, brigade, division, and theater levels. Is awarded many awards from the United States, from the U.S. Army, and other countries in the region. To sum it up, he's the right man in the right place to answer our questions and try to solve our dilemmas, and he will discuss difficulties of intervention and the impact of U.S. policy choices in the Syrian conflict.
All right, well, thank you very much. My name is Colonel Dave Brown, and I am a military professor right now at the Naval War College, where I teach strategy. I'm required to say, though, that whatever I'm about to say is not necessarily the views of the United States Naval War College, nor the Department of Defense. And so I'm here as an actor here discussing these things with you as an individual. This morning, or a couple of days ago, there was a reference in one of the presentations to Munich. I know that when the word Munich comes up in Israel, sometimes the vision is of the Olympics and not necessarily of the World War II event, but the ugly word of appeasement came up. And I think from the newspaper today, I guess we could have referred to the other aspect of that famous picture after Munich when Chamberlain comes back and in the midst of the crowd holds the paper up and says, "This represents peace in our time." I'm not sure that that's the case from the American or the papers today. I think that this is far from over. And so I think in light of this panel talking about who's who and militant actants in the Syrian war, the real question that I would address this morning is whether or not the United States would be the next armed actor in this particular civil war. And even though there's been a delay on a vote in the United States, even though there's been this diplomatic initiative, that could change very rapidly. I think there's a lot of things, as we would say, sometimes a lot of water to go under that bridge. And so it could change very rapidly if other decisions were made or if Syria doesn't follow through with the Russian initiative. And we're back to the discussion that you've been all reading about in the last week as to what the U.S. strategic actions might be and what those implications might be. And so I thought I'd spend a little time discussing that with you and helping you understand maybe what the strategic choices are. I'm going to pull a little bit away from the tactical element of who's operating in Syria and talk a little bit about the United States' choices and implications if we actually get involved in this in a bigger way. So first of all, just a couple of thoughts about the inputs that are going into the political process in the United States. I think, number one, we used to talk at length about the ghosts of Vietnam, and that was the big thing in the American military particularly. I think today, particularly in reference to the American polity, it's really about the ghost of Iraq and the ghost of Afghanistan in terms of the particular cost that was, at one time over $20 billion a month, a lot of American lives, 10 years, over a decade of war in Afghanistan. And as I brought one sentence from the our Jerusalem Post article this morning, said America's war-weary and rightly skeptical regarding the efficacy of even the most well-intentioned forced regime change. So I think that, there is a big issue here of lack of domestic support. As you've seen, the polling's pretty low in the United States as to whether or not we should get involved in another intervention in this part of the world, in the Middle East. But it's really the ghosts of these recent military interventions in the Middle East that are looming large over the debate. Not to mention the lack of international support, certainly with our allies, the British. Polling's down. And of course, those who study war theory would tell you that you can't really conduct a war, particularly in a democracy, for very long without a certain amount of political domestic support. I mean, even Clausewitz talks at length about the need to balance support for war, particularly in a representative government. And then I think there is the, further ghost, the ghost of unilateralism that kind of rears its head in the American public debate, that we took a lot of grief in the international environment for going it alone, so to speak, in some of the previous interventions. And so there is a need at some level to try to gain some form of either UN sanction or international support, because I don't think the government wants to move in that direction. And so that's a further difficulty as an input. Having said that, I think, regardless of whether or not there was a polling that the vote would be low in both the House and the Senate this week, there is also a strain in American politics of whether or not the rest of the world looks at this as right or wrong. There is a strain of a sense of moral righteousness in the American polity as to whether or not we should lead and whether or not we should particularly lead as it results in the issue of chemical weapons. Of course, we were leaders and involved in the decisions on the chemical weapons ban. It traces all the way back to the 100,000 deaths that occurred after World War I. Geneva Protocols in 1925 that prohibited the use of those weapons in war, although it didn't prohibit stockpiling or production or research on them. But in the early 90s, there was the Chemical Weapons Convention, and the U.S. was a big signatory to that. And in fact, 198 countries in the world signed on to that, and that's probably the highest bar you'll get on worldwide consensus, because that represents almost 98% of the countries in the world. And I don't think you get any other decision where you get agreement over 98% of the countries in the world. And so the question here is that there is a moral strain as to whether or not the United States, if forced to do something, would move back in that direction. And that may be at war with a strain of some isolationism that has been delayed since world wars and 9/11 particularly. I think in the final analysis, though, if the United States becomes another armed actor in the civil war in Syria, regardless of what the United States does, it's going to be damned if you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. And regardless of what the United States does, there will be a lot of actors in the world and in this region that do not agree and are not happy with the decisions that are made by the U.S. military or the government. Now, having said that, just maybe help you understand what the strategic choices might be and what those implications are. And I think really, if the United States were to get involved, if the whole diplomatic process were to fall apart, and this decision were revisited, I would say that there's three major choices, and they all have particular strategic implications. First choice is basically to take a no vote in the government and the president hide behind that and basically do nothing. The problem with that and the strategic implications, I think, is that one, it harms credibility and voice of leadership in the world, and it reduces the confidence of our allies in the United States and whether or not we're going to be there on other issues that our allies are concerned about, including Israel. And of course, it may enable the use or further use of those munitions if they are not removed from Syria. And so if Assad continues to have his war and nothing is done, the likelihood is that he will probably use the weapons again. And of course, I think it harms the presidential agenda for the next couple of years, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you stand on in the United States. It certainly harms the reputation of the presidency and the government. And so there's a lot of strategic implications to not doing anything, regardless, and there are costs involved with that strategic choice. The other two choices, I think, are referenced, by oftentimes when we talk about warfare, as two possibilities. One is on the extreme right, which is the overthrow of a particular government, what we might call an unlimited political option. And the other one is a more limited military or political option for the use of military force. An unlimited option of overthrowing the Assad regime, that capability exists. I don't think that we doubt that capability exists, but as we've already discussed, there may not be the political will to do that. And the other thing is that the implications there is that the analysis, I think, of folks in the U.S. and possibly in this country as well, as we've heard even this week, is that I'm not sure that Israel or other allies actually support us overthrowing the regime. And I think there's a lot of people walking into the White House, probably in closed-door sessions, warning the president that if we were to go that far, the second and third order consequences might not be what we imagine them. And of course, what would happen with the chemical weapons stockpiles? And as we just heard from one of the presenters, with this list of actors that's here active against the Assad regime, the Assad regime, we don't know exactly where all of those munitions would go. And of course, there would be, in addition, a much, much heavier cost in military arms and commitment in a variety of ways in order to pursue that political option. In fact, the higher the political option is, the more means that it takes to accomplish that. I think the third one is a limited political goal. And that's a great question, because the first act of any strategist, I teach strategy, and the first act of any strategist is to try to determine what the nature is of the conflict that you're about to embark upon and not confuse it for something it's not. That's according to the dead Prussian Clausewitz. The problem here is that no one really has stated or decided what that political goal would actually be if we pursued a limited military strike. And then secondly, what kind of military action would be taken? And would that accomplish whatever limited political goal that you set out to achieve if you took action, particularly without ground forces? Could you, in fact, meet the stipulation of whatever political goal you've chosen? And so that's a big dilemma in this particular piece. The other thing is we could arm someone to a greater degree, but again, as the doctor said a minute ago, the difficulty of that is arm who and with what, and where do those weapons end up at if, in fact, we can't control who's in power or what happens with those weapons afterwards. Some other choices that are on the more tactical side, we could target command and control in the country. Symbolically, we could probably target Assad or his brother. We probably could target the unit that actually conducted the attacks, although if you start to talk about taking out individual artillery weapon systems or individual weapon systems and you're trading cruise missiles for it, that's a pretty expensive proposition. And there might be the possibility of taking out part of the chemical stockpiles. This isn't the exact same targeting set that, for instance, you have a difficulty looking at the Iranian target set, which is very dispersed and very protected and underground. The likelihood that much of the stockpiles probably could be reached. The difficulty there is that there are some technical aspects. I could talk about that a little bit if anyone's interested in the questions and answers, because you don't want to blow up a chemical stockpile and leave a bigger environmental mess or a disaster of the spread of those into the community. And so there's some particular technical challenges, tactical challenges of attacking those particular targets. Can be done, but there are some implications as to how to do that. And the question there is, does that deter Assad from using them again? And so there's a political question there, and a difficult one to determine. If you remember in the 2006 engagement that Israel had across the border, northern border here, sometimes it's difficult to determine whether or not the limited military strikes that you make are going to have the political consequences that you want them to have, and history is replete with examples where it's not. There's a possibility we could put in a no-fly zone. We've done that before, again, at pretty heavy cost in terms of munitions and presence and pilot hours and planes. The difficulty there as well is that do you tip the balance, and if you do, does Assad fall, and is that what you and your allies actually want to occur given the alternative choices? Finally, I think if you're looking at limited political choices, almost always a limited military strike for limited political goals is highly unpalatable. And the reason it's unpalatable is because usually the person you attack is still in power after you are finished. And it usually means that you end up negotiating something with someone that you consider onerous and that you didn't want to be there after you're finished. And so almost any limited political goal that would result in a limited military strike, again, is not going to be met with a lot of pleased respondents from many areas around the world. So finally, I think all of these have strategic import. They have a strategic import on the region, and they have strategic import on the potential for future terrorist acts if the chemical munitions fall in the wrong hands. But I don't think that necessarily we have a paper this morning that says that we've achieved peace in our time. And I do think that this is far from over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. And from one colonel to another, I'm very happy to introduce Colonel Jonathan Fighel, who is a senior researcher at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism here at Herzliya at IDC. And his topic will be the ramification of arms smuggling to the Syrian rebels.
Thank you, Eyal. Eyal is also my professor, not only Moti's. He's grown up generations, and I hope you are proud. Anyhow, thank you for coming this morning as an ICT host. I wish to thank you for coming for the conference and particularly for this session. I will try now to land a soft land from strategy to, let's say, tactics or operative aspects. And it's not only Israel, but in the region. And I would like to stress about several issues which are a cause of concern. And the main cause is the proliferation of arms that is being supplied to the Syrian rebels. Now, we know that supply is being funneled from a variety of sources with coordination and supervision of the United States, although the United States officially is not involved in any military act, but the covert operation does exist on the ground. And this is based on open sources, of course. And arms, ammunition, and so on is being funneled and transferred since January 2013 with the help and supervision of CIA, Arab governments, and Turkey. And these have sharply increased the military aid for the opposition fighters, which you heard from Dr. Kedar, who they are. Gangs, in addition to global jihadists. We know that there are secret airlifts of arms, ammunition, and military equipment which is being transferred. More than 160 military cargo flights have been identified flying from Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, with a military-style cargo, landing in some places in Turkey on one hand from the north, and then being infiltrated through the Turkish border into the Syrian arena. Some of the shipments are being driven from Croatia. Just as a chart that demonstrates the flights and the support, which actually started, is being identified since 2012. You see that from Qatar is the majority of shipments going under the supervision of the Qatari government with cooperation with the United States. So don't think that the United States is not involved in the war in Syria. The US is involved, but in a certain type of indirect involvement. So the Qatar, of course, because it's a US ally, because the presence of US forces in Qatar, but also from Saudi Arabia and also from Croatia. Some of them are being flown directly to airfields, usually military and civilian airfields in Turkey. And the other one, and the other place is through Jordan. And from Jordan, it's being diverted through the land convoys into the southern part of Syria. So we see the potential that is being identified, which have transferred tons of equipment into Syria. What is the problem? Geographically, Jabhat al-Nusra, which I think is the main concern for the region, because they are being identified as the more organized, the more dangerous, the more Al-Qaeda-oriented. Geographically, they are located in those vicinities, which is the north part of Syria, Homs, Hama, those regions, the eastern part of Syria, Deir ez-Zor, and so on, that region, and in the southern part of Syria, the vicinity of Daraa, locations also near the border with Israel, the Golan Heights, the southern part of the Golan Heights. Now, the problem is that I think that Syria is becoming the new Afghanistan. If it's not became, but it is becoming, or in the process of becoming the new Afghanistan, with all the ramifications. But unlike Afghanistan, the location of Syria geopolitically on the ground in the Middle East has crucial ramification regarding the spillover of arms and instability into Turkey on one hand, active jihadi zones in Iraq, destabilizing Jordan, and also ramification of smuggling into Israel. Now, I'm trying not to be alarmist and stick to the facts. Two sources of supply. One is what is called supervised control. By whom? By the US, by the CIA. Meaning allowing shipments of weapons which are controllable and are not advanced, like RPGs, like machine guns, rifles, ammunition, and so on, the conventional types of weapons, like it was done before in Afghanistan. The problem is that we have also unsupervised or uncontrolled sources coming from one element is Sudan, which starts to conduct its own policy in the region and starts to send shipments to the Syrian rebels with an intention to supply to Jabhat al-Nusra. And the other one are the looted Syrian warehouses. So these are the unsupervised potentials. The Sudan has started to ship and deliver weapons which are a cause of concern. And shipments have been identified that are being transferred from Sudan into Syria. And because of the well-known, notorious role of Sudan with its connection with China and with other countries which are promoting instability in the Middle East, I think that these shipments are very problematic in light of also of the Iranian and the Chinese involvement in this process. The main concern is that the advanced Chinese-made FN-6 anti-craft missile, which is an advanced heat-seeker missile, have been identified within the hands of the rebels in Syria, identified as part of Jabhat al-Nusra. Meaning we see the spillover of advanced, not the traditional AK-47 or hand grenades or so on, an advanced weaponry which is coming into the hands of those jihadists. And this is a cause of concern, not only to the Assad regime, but regionally, because the spillover can be effective also to other parts of the region, because they are not supervised. I'm leaving now the chemical substance and so on, speaking about these. And the problem is that there are signs that those missiles have been identified gunning down Syrian helicopters. We know that this was shipped, or there are reports that these missiles were shipped with erasing their identification numbers and so on. We're speaking about a covert attempt to provide the Syrian rebels or the jihadist kind of weaponry which cannot be identified about its source. The risks. I would say the Al-Qaeda elements in Jabhat al-Nusra in particular, there are several regions that can be affected by their activities. One is the Israeli-Syrian border on the Golan Heights, and this is a potential deterioration regarding the crossover attacks on Israel. Another element or another region is, of course, Jordan, and this is the spillover of jihadi Salafi groups that wish to destabilize Jordan. The intention does exist, the motivation does exist, and if weapons will be delivered or be smuggled into Jordan, there is a threat that those intentions will be practically interpreted into actions and to destabilizing the kingdom. Another element which is coming back through Jordan, and this is through Jordan reopening a new old front against Israel, and this is the Jordan Valley. If you remember, during the 70s, the Jordan Valley suffered from attacks by the PLO at that time on Israeli settlements, Israeli cities, on the valley of Bet She'an, if you know the Israeli map. And these weapons, the advanced weapons, but also the regular weapons, the spillover to the south through Jordan may affect the reopening of a new jihadi front, but not only, it can be also advanced by the Palestinian rejection axis, which oppose the Palestinian-Israeli negotiation and any settlement. This can be promoted by, or a proxy by, the PFLP General Command, the PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or Hamas. There is also a potential of introduction game-changer weapons. It doesn't have to be advanced, but RPGs in the West Bank or new technology of manpads into the West Bank. This is a game changer, although it is an old weapon style which is being implemented and used in other parts of the world, but penetrating this into the West Bank may affect the flight routes to Eilat, through the Jordan Valley, the West Bank, and also targeting flights taking off and landing in the Ben Gurion from the western slopes of the West Bank. Now, this scenario is not because I'm an alarmist. This scenario is based on facts that at least twice, thanks to the Jordanian good intelligence and operational capabilities, which are guarding very well the kingdom, they have intercepted 2 cells that one of them confessed during their interrogation that they intended to smuggle the weapons into the West Bank. They are operatives of the PFLP General Command, although they are part or they are loyal to Syria, but they have their own agenda as well. And while smuggling in a lorry full of watermelon, inside under the watermelon, they've smuggled anti-tank and anti-aircraft launchers. And they've been intercepted and interrogated by the Jordanian. And you see here the route that, according to their confession, what they wanted to do. They wanted to smuggle it circumventing Amman security patrols, going on the south to the vicinity of the Dead Sea, and then from the Dead Sea, especially in the Arava, which is less protected by the Israeli military, because this is a peace. There is a peace between Israel and Jordan, and Israel is not investing too many patrols and operational defense capabilities there, to smuggle it into the vicinity of the West Bank, the southern part of the West Bank, meaning the region of Hebron. Now, all of these activities have been implemented in the past. It's not a new idea. Those routes, the IDF, the Israeli, and the Shin Bet, were actively engaged during the mid-70s or 70s and mid-70s, thwarting and preventing from smuggling to occur, and there were captures. And I remember also, I don't want to be alarmist, but also even through the Dead Sea. So today it's very difficult because we have, I think, we still have Navy patrols there. But even through the rivers of the Arnon, I'm speaking to the Israeli audience because the Americans don't know where is the Arnon, but the Arnon River, which is coming from east to west to the Dead Sea, and also the Zarqa Muin River, there were traditionally there cached arms. They cached arms and they supported the Palestinian groups crossing into the West Bank. Now, I'm not saying that they will do the same, but the potential of reviving new smuggling routes, especially of rejectionist groups within the Palestinian, namely Hamas and Islamic Jihad, this should be taken into consideration. And therefore, while speaking about strategy, what will happen in Syria, we have to prepare ourselves also to this small, maybe insignificant, but very significant for Israel, because one manpad which will succeed to gun down an airplane or will do damage which was unprecedented, this is a game changer, and we have to watch both the unconventional, the conventional, the traditional, and to see how these weapons and their potential will not harm the interest and the security of the state of Israel. Last one is, of course, the spillover into Iraq. Even al-Maliki acknowledged in a statement several days ago that he is very much concerned. Now, he's not concerned only from the chemicals that maybe spill over. I don't know if it can happen or not, but he's speaking about shipments of arms. And of course, this can increase and also fuel the instability which exists in Iraq, and this is another aspect of concern. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Zelin of the Richard Borow Fellow at the Washington Institute. His research focuses on how jihadist groups are adjusting to the new political environment in the era of Arab uprising and the Salafi politics in countries which witness transition to democracy, and is a frequent contributor to foreign policy, foreign affairs, and the Atlantic, the author of recent study, Syrian military opposition, how effective, united, or extremist. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope everybody's still a little awake and the coffee isn't fading yet. Try and liven things up a little bit here. I don't have any slides, but I got some really great information and analysis about the evolution of the jihadi involvement within Syria. I've been working on research related to this for over the past 2 years, and currently in a project with Peter Newman over there at King's College on a book related to the Syrian jihad. So as Yoni just mentioned, I actually do agree with him in the respect that I think that Syria currently is the second coming of Afghanistan in the 1980s in many ways. But I'll return to this point later in my presentation, more related to foreign fighters and what kind of effect that will have in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe in the years to come. But first, I think it's good to step back and understand the evolution of how we got to where we are today in terms of the jihadis and their role in Syria, as well as understanding their own lessons learned from past jihads over the past 10 to 15 years. So the Syrian uprising started in March 2011, and similar to other arenas like Tunisia and Egypt, the jihadis more or less were not involved in it. But they were very quick in terms of being able to respond to it and come up with a type of strategy and plan. In some countries, they're specifically focusing on dawah or activities related to outreach to local citizens in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt, and providing services. But in Syria, of course, it quickly descended into an actual war, and the Syrian uprising was unable to topple the Assad regime, as we know. There was an important debate going on at the time, though, between two key jihadist ideologues, Abu Basir al-Tartusi and Abu Mundhir al-Shinkiti, essentially talking about whether individuals should be involved in the actual protests in the streets or whether they should stay away from it because many of the protesters originally were secular, were nationalist. Abu Basir al-Tartusi came down on the side that, yes, they should work with these individuals because anything against the Assad regime is a good thing, and that essentially things will work out later. Whereas Shinkiti was more skeptical. He essentially advised that instead of working with the others, if individuals wanted to be involved in the protests, they could, but they should do it separately and have their own Islamically sanctioned chants, essentially. And that was sort of the key debate going on in the early part of the Syrian uprising. This all changed, though, starting in the summer when the Free Syrian Army was coming into being in about June, July 2011. At this time, this wasn't public knowledge, but based off of a lot of research I've done and interviews I've conducted with jihadists, in late July 2011, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who's the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq, also known as al-Qaeda in Iraq, dispatched Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, who's the current leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, to go to Syria, because at the time they were in Iraq, to go establish Jabhat al-Nusra. Of course, Jabhat al-Nusra itself was not announced until January 2012, and that's when we first started to see signs of actual jihadist activities on the ground in the Syrian war. Because there was a lag time between when the FSA was created and then when jihadis officially were announced, they were sort of starting from behind. But one of the things that they had an advantage is that many of the Syrians that built the core of Jabhat al-Nusra actually fought in Iraq last decade against the United States as well as Iraqi Shia. And therefore, they had a lot of experience, and they themselves weren't starting from scratch in terms of building up capabilities, and they already had their own weapons networks and financial networks. In many ways, they just reactivated them from the heyday of the Iraq Jihad from 2004 to 2009. And it's important to also understand the importance of why jihad in Syria is so significant for these individuals. Part of it has to do with the ideological aspects, since the Assad regime is Alawite and they don't view them as real Muslims. But more importantly, there's a lot of religious significance to Syria related to history in terms of the caliphate as well as the end times prophecies. There's a reason why Jabhat al-Nusra's media outlet name is Al-Manara al-Bayda, or the White Minaret, which is where Jesus is supposed to descend during the end times to then battle the Antichrist and, everything after that happens. So you also have to understand the religious significance as well as just the purely political and ideological. You saw a slow buildup of Jabhat al-Nusra from January 2012 up through the early fall 2012. But there was a huge turning point in October 2012, almost a year ago now. This is about the time where you started to see the rebels actually taking villages and cities and liberating them. But one of the issues for the FSA is that they are quite corrupt. They're extorting individuals for higher taxes. They're hoarding a lot of bread and fuel supplies. And therefore, there became a huge humanitarian crisis because there are major bread shortages in northern Syria, especially in Aleppo. What happened next, though, was that you had jihadis insert themselves, Jabhat al-Nusra specifically, as well as Ahrar al-Sham, and they essentially came in and were like, "Look, we're gonna get this all figured out," and they did. They essentially were able to provide order, become fair arbiters, and were able to stop the bread shortage. And afterwards, they were able to actually have huge quantity that would go months ahead of time. So they're able to really restore some level of normalcy to these places. And it's important to understand why this is significant in many ways. Not just the fact that they're involved in this sort of proto-governance, but also because this has come a long way since al-Qaeda in Iraq's heyday, when they're essentially just chopping people's heads off and blowing up mosques and killing civilians and trying to institute their very narrow interpretations of Sharia over the top. The jihadists have very much internalized the failures of Iraq and learned the lessons there, and they've tried to implement a new way over the past few years. We really first started to see this in Yemen, but we've also seen it in other places like northern Mali and in North Africa. But the best that they've done so far is in northern and eastern Syria, where they've been involved in proto-governance, social services, as well as providing education for children. Just a few weeks ago, they were having a party for children in a bunch of different neighborhoods in Aleppo, having ice cream eating contests, and for girls they're having cantaloupe eating contests, which I've never heard of cantaloupe eating contests, but there you go. So it's important to understand that these guys really learned their lessons from the failures in Iraq, and that they're trying to build up a constituency within Syria among the Sunni civilian population, because now it's not just this vanguard type of organization, but they truly are trying to create it more into a social movement. So therefore, if there is an attack against them from the West in the future, they have a large base of support already, and they're not just alone by themselves. So this sort of brings us through the end of 2012, and you start seeing them continue to gain support. And then a huge announcement happened this April, in mid-April 2013. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who, as I said, is the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq, he made an announcement extending the Islamic State into al-Sham, as they call it. So it's now the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham. And he essentially wanted to take ownership of the project that he feels he created originally in July 2011, and trying to take credit for everything that Jabhat al-Nusra has done in Syria. The problem for Baghdadi is that Jawlani has been able to build up his leadership, his capabilities, and he's been the one who's essentially saying, look, I went in here, I built up this organization, and I was the one who was able to deliver the goods, essentially, in terms of a positive role for jihadis amongst the population. As a result, you saw some tensions at the leadership level between these two guys, and unlike what the media was talking about in terms of there being an actual merger between the two groups, in fact, you saw a split because they had different visions. Jawlani rebuffed him and said he's not changing the name of Jabhat al-Nusra, and since then, they've both operated in Syria, but you haven't seen infighting between the two groups amongst the foot soldiers. Instead, what the jihadi forums and a lot of ideologues have been talking about is that there actually should be a true competition of who are the best jihadists. Is it Jabhat al-Nusra, or is it the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham? And therefore, who could do the best operations against the Assad regime, against the Shabaha, against Hezbollah, as well as all the Iraqi Shia militias? So, in fact, this has actually been a good thing for the jihadists in many ways, because they have this good competition between them. And so this is sort of the current state of play that we're seeing, and ISIS is really on the up and up in many respects, because after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's announcement, many of the foreigners decided to join the group, though it is important to note that unlike when Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was in charge of al-Qaeda in Iraq, the jihad in Syria, most of them are actually Syrian. It's true that there are foreigners there, but most of them are still very much Syrian. So related to this is the foreign fighters, and this is the crux of why I think that this is the second coming of Afghanistan in the 1980s. The number of foreigners is unprecedented. Based off of research I've collected in Arabic sources, Western sources, as well as jihadi sources, there are individuals from over 60 countries that are fighting on the side of the rebellion. You have, at a conservative estimate, about 5,000 foreigners, all the way up to a more liberal estimate of about 10,000. And most worrisome, I think, from a Western perspective, is probably the Europeans. There are probably about between 700 and 1,000 Europeans who are currently fighting in Syria. This is unprecedented. We've never seen this before. It's amazing because, for example, you have 30 people from Finland coming. It's incredible because probably between the 1980s until the Syrian Jihad, you probably saw maybe 5 Finns at total who have ever gone to do this. In addition to this, it's important to note that you have groups within Syria from different countries who have established themselves, which we saw in the 1980s. So essentially you have different formations that are working with groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, but they're specifically Saudi, specifically Moroccan, specifically Tunisian, specifically Chechen, etc. And they're currently, obviously fighting, but they're also training because at the end of the day, when the Syrian conflict is over, they want to go back home and they want to overthrow their regimes because they don't believe that they're true Islamic states and they believe that it's in charge of a bunch of Arab tyrants. So therefore, we have a lot of similar dynamics. But unlike in the 1990s when we saw these individuals go back to North Africa and the Arab world to start insurgencies, many of the leaders from that time who were authoritarian and able to crush these guys, they're a lot weaker states. For example, Libya, constant chaos. They don't have a Gaddafi type of figure. Not to say that Gaddafi is good in any manner. Tunisia, the government's very weak. Egypt, they have their own crisis now because of the coup and the starting low-level insurgency in the Sinai. So there are a lot of issues at hand that could, come into being in the coming years. And I think that it's possible, especially in the European context, that we could see a second wave of large-scale attacks like we saw after 9/11 because there are so many individuals. Of course, some will die in Syria, and not all of them will return home and become jihadists trying to attack their homeland, but there will be some, and I do think that something will slip through. And I do think that we will be dealing with the consequences of the Syrian conflict for decades to come, just like we did with Afghanistan in the 1980s. So I know this is quite pessimistic, but this is the reality of it, and I think it's important to understand, especially with so much discussion about whether the United States will be involved and everybody else. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. The map.
We need more conferences.
Yeah. After listening to 4 wonderful talks, lectures, I think I should limit myself to some, I don't know whether I should say concluding remarks or some remarks regarding the general picture, not necessarily the militants, but the general situation in Syria. And I did, as you all remember, started by arguing that if there is no strike, if there is a limited strike and Assad survived, we might remember this day as the beginning of the end of the Syrian revolution. December 2011, 2 years ago, Ehud Barak in the Knesset declared that Assad is finished. It's a matter of several days. I guess some of you do not remember who is Ehud Barak. He used to be the defense minister and the prime minister of Israel. Bashar al-Assad is still with us. He can. It doesn't mean that he should or he must or it's 100%, but he can win the war. Once he wins the war, and that's my argument, he can easily regain control over Syria, and then we'll meet him again, the same leader we use, or maybe a little bit different. For that, we need to have a look at the course of events in Syria and the roots for this Syrian revolution. The dilemma I'm facing, well, it's after reading. There was a German colonel, von Kleist, who wrote in his diaries, it was July 41, mid-July 41, when the Germans made their way to Moscow, and they believe it was a matter of, several days till they achieved victory. And then another German general wrote in his diary, we expected to meet 200 Russian divisions and to fight with 200 Russian divisions. That's what we knew about the strength of the Russian army. Till today, mid-July, we already destroyed 360, and they are still coming. Now, we can't call them divisions, but they are there to offer us resistance. And then this colonel wrote, it's like the ants and the elephant. I mean, any move of us, we crush millions, but eventually they will overcome us. And when I look at the war in Syria, that's basically the situation. The elephant, the regime, and the ants spread all over the country, but lack of any unity strategy. And I wonder who eventually will win, like in many other cases. The ants will overcome the regime, or the regime, the elephant. I mean, what we should understand about the situation in Syria, I mean, the different dimension. First of all, it's a domestic struggle inside Syria among the Syrians themselves. That's how it started. I tend to believe that's how it will be dictated eventually, decided eventually. But of course, there is the regional dimension. It was mentioned here. I mean, Turkey, Iran, Hezbollah, the Saudis, and here you can see the tension between Arabs and Iranians, Arabs with Turkey, moderate Arab states vis-à-vis Iran. It turned to be a battlefield, but you know, when we say moderate Arab states, Egypt, but Egypt is not anymore after the, how should we say, coup or revolution. Yeah, after the changes in Egypt lately, Egypt is not anymore with the rebels. It's still against the axis of evil. Turkey, the United States, Qatar, and Hamas, and the rebels. So there is a shift in the Egyptian position. Now, it's not anymore the Egyptian youngsters who sympathize with the Syrian youngsters who go to the streets early March 2011. Now these are the Egyptian generals who sympathize with the Syrian generals fighting to maintain the cohesiveness of the state institution. And still, it started, and there is this dimension, you know, the regional dimension, Turkey vis-à-vis Iran, but there are changes all the time. But don't make a mistake. Without the open, the routes of open routes of supply of weapon and money from Saudi, Jordan, and Qatar, and Turkey, as was mentioned here, the rebel cannot continue. The revolution cannot continue for ever. And of course, there is a Cold War, and it was discussed as well. Without the Russian backing, I guess Bashar wouldn't have survived till now. Anyhow, it started as a revolution, but unlike Egypt, it was a peasant revolution, limited to rural areas, mainly among the Sunnis, peasants in all around the country. Now, that's the big thing. Why that's the big thing? Because this element, this sector of the society used to be a supporter of the Ba'ath regime. But there were changes, mainly after Bashar came to power, and these peasants got against the regime. Now they are full with energy. Poor Sunni peasants all around the country have nothing to lose. Now full with hate and for the regime. They are ready to kill, they are ready to die, they are ready to sacrifice themselves. That's what actually what gave the revolution the energy. They did well, but I mean, that's how it started. That's where the situation is still here, because if you look at Syria, and Bashar was right when pointing out that Syria is not Tunisia or Egypt, this sector I refer to is something like in between 20, 25, 30% out of the total population of Syria. There are the minorities, Druze to the south, white, meaning supportive of the regime, Alawites, Christian, the Kurds who took a neutral position, 25 to 30% of the population still supportive of the regime. And the big cities, although there are fighting going on inside the cities, we can say that the middle class and the upper middle class is clearly with the regime or sitting on the fence. So out of any given 10 Syrian, 2 to 3 are clearly against the regime, 2 to 3 are clearly for the regime, the other 6 are sitting on the fence. And still, the rebel got momentum, no doubt about it, and they were able to take over the rebels' most rural areas in Syria, and still never took any major city apart from an important city, and still I guess most of you haven't heard about it, so you can realize how important it is. Rika here. You see the mouse? No. I don't see it. But anyhow, Rika here. That's the only cities they were able to take over. The other major cities are still under the control of the regime. The main roads are still under the control of the regime. The rebels mainly are to be found in the rural areas. And if the story of the revolution was for the first 2 years a story of success, they were able to take over more villages and towns. Well, half a year ago, we can say there was some change when the regime for the first time was able to stop their momentum and even to regain, with the help of Hezbollah, some not too important and still significantly, symbolically important sites like the city of Qusayr, which controlled the passage from Lebanon to inside Syria, northern Syria, and from the hinterland, Aleppo, Damascus to the coast to the Alawite region. Now, on the one hand, the regime didn't collapse. Not even one Syrian unit defected. I mean, many soldiers, many officers, we can say, 25 to 30%. Altogether, these are the estimates, 100,000 out of 300,000 defected, but not even one unit, as a unit, clearly not a division or a brigade. It's not what we had in Libya where, there was a split, half of the army revolted. Not even one high-ranking officer. Of course, there is one example, another example, but basically the state institutions survived and stick to the, not royal family, but to the dynasty and to Bashar. Not what kind of an assistant, indirect, but in Libya, a week or 2 weeks after the revolution, Gaddafi was left with no even one diplomat. Not even one Syrian diplomat defected apart from the ambassador in Qatar who was bought by the Qataris. I mean, they all, there are some, yes, in Athens, the consul in Cyprus, yeah, okay, but I mean, the general picture is quite clear. So the state institution, no, it's not me. It's, yeah. Okay, yeah, maybe it's
special device.
Yeah, no.
The red line.
Yeah. The other, yeah. So not even one, as I said before, diplomat defected. Now, but it's not only the success of the regime, it's mainly the failure of the rebels' ants. I mean, they are all over. But the lack of unity. After 2.5 years, they are not able to unite. We are still speaking about gangs. I mean, if you look at the nature of the battle, these are small battles all over the country where in each place a small gang of rebels can be found sometimes they were together against the local background in a specific city, coordination, working together. But there is no any army. The Free Army is simply a title or an umbrella organization through which they hope to get money and ammunition, the division, as was described here. After 2.5 years, there is no any real military command, no really political leader. And, of course, the radicalization and Islamization. I mean, many Syrians who tend to support the revolution at the beginning looked at what happened and say, we do not want anything to do with, you know, these acts of terror and with the Islamization, the places where the rebels took over. We, in some of the places, and were under the control of these Islamists, the Raqqa, you know, women were thrown to the houses, and religious law, Sharia, was implemented. So even those Syrians who tend to support the revolution or sympathize with the revolution came to the conclusion that it's better to stick to Bashar, to the current regime. So it's not only the success of the regime, and the regime did well. I mean, Bashar didn't got panic and didn't escape from the state like, let's say, Ben Ali. But it's not only the success of the president and the regime, it's mainly, the story is mainly the failure of the rebel, which can be understood against a clear background. The Syrian society is a divided society, was always a divided society. The president of Iraq, Jalal Talabani, once said there is no such a thing as Syrian nation. There are the Druze, the Alawites, the Christian, and still a tremendous failure. However, you know, the situation, as we say, too close to call, there is a clear tie or deadlock. Anything small can make a change. I mean, for example, 18 July 2012, when there was this bombing, and the top echelon of the security leadership or command of the Syrian regime, they all were killed in this bombing in Damascus. This was a symbolical event which encouraged the rebels for the first time to get into the big cities. For the first time, rebels were able to capture or take control over some neighborhoods in Damascus, and for the first time to get into the city of Aleppo. The day after, 60% of the policemen of Aleppo defected. I mean, so give a sign to those who are sitting on the fence, and because there is this tie or deadlock, and that's why an American intervention can make this change, even if this is not the idea behind it, or that's not the aim. So what we see here is a deadlock. What we see here is a situation which can continue for some time. This is not a conflict that can be solved through a diplomatic process or with a peace agreement, only surrender, not a peace agreement. It's not a war that can be sided in one battle, but in many battles. And maybe it's a war that can be decided actually when somebody will get tired. The rebels, the ants, hope that eventually they can overcome the elephant. The elephant hopes that they simply get tired, like many peasant revolts in the history of Syria. When you look at the first years of the French occupation of Syria, there were many peasant revolts. For example, a very famous one in northern Syria, which was supported by the Turks. But after Turkey and French reached an agreement about the borderline, the Turks cut their, that's not me, cut the line of support, and this revolt came to an end. So it's clearly the hope there that the peasants eventually will come to an will get tired, or Turkey and Qatar will get tired. Now, as a result of the brutalization of the war, I mean, it's not that that's what the regime really wanted, but eventually he's fighting the kind of a war that is aimed not only at, hitting some rebels, but extermination of the entire population which support the rebels. That's the only way we can explain the use not only of chemical weapons, but missiles and aircraft and artillery. And that's how we can explain the number of dead, already more than 120,000, and that's how we can explain the fact that 1/3 of the entire population, 4 to 6 million, became refugees. He is simply going to win by expelling not only the rebels, but those who support them. So, as I said before, if it continues like that, and there is no any major change, and foreign intervention or a dramatic change, assassination of the president or something like that, he can win. Now remember, the militants, 10,000, 50,000, that's a problem. But let's remember that there are in the Syrian army 200,000 soldiers. On the rebel side, we speak of 100,000 rebels spread all over the country. Now there is clearly a process of radicalization, and this group can get stronger. I mean, if there would have been a military or any sort of intervention 2.5 years ago, Syria could witness a peaceful or smooth or relatively peaceful transition. But Bashar was not ready to give up, and there was no any military intervention. Now it's quite impossible. It's becoming quite difficult because of the radicalization, because of the Islamization. But and clearly people are joining these groups because they are have their sources. They are more disciplined and organized. And still we are speaking about 10,000, 50,000 foreigners. We are speaking about 5,000 fighters of Hezbollah. And on the other side, 300,000 Syrians who are fighting each other. And this is the important thing, not these 10,000 Hezbollah warriors or 10,000 militants, but I clearly agree that once the war is coming to an end, they will come back to Europe, to where they came from, and this can be a source of concern for all of us. So with this, I will conclude my remarks, and I'll open the floor for your questions, remarks, and maybe, Moti, if you still have time, you will be the first to, or you need to.
I have a lesson in 20 minutes, but if you ask,
yeah.
To me,
so if Moti needs to leave, so okay, so short questions to Moti, he will answer. Yeah.
So what's the good news? Secondly, question to you, what are concerns at all? Perhaps the Americans should be backing Bashar and not going to bomb him. I mean, in the end, is it really different whether somebody dies of chemical warfare or lead poison?
Okay, so this is not only M2. We'll pick, or maybe you want to comment, say something, Moti, and we'll let you go back to your students. No, I mean, we'll have no time because I see that the questions are general. So we'll.
3 days ago, I think it was almost Gilad who said that the U.S. shouldn't intervene now, and the best policy, as he sees it, that the U.S. should identify, or the West should identify a leader and nurture him, and then intervene once he becomes stronger. And then you will have a pro-Western regime. I mean, do you think it's a feasible solution?
Okay, so Moti will make a comment, then we'll continue picking up question and the...
Something which I think none of us related to.
Moti,
is
you can stand up and this will help you make your
Thanks a lot. Something which I believe no one related to is the real future of Syria, besides the terror or being a hub for terrorists and jihadists for like Afghanistan. I believe that Syria will not survive as a state, consolidated state. It will be divided at the end of the day. Already we see today an autonomy, good autonomy in the Kurdish district in the northeast part. The Alawis, if they will be willing to preserve the connection between their heads and shoulders, they will have to establish their own state, because the Islamists will never, especially now after the bloodshed, nobody will forgive them, nobody will forget what they did, and they will have to stick to their own historic district in the northwest part of Syria and build a fortress, maybe with support of some local or regional states, but definitely they, I believe, have no future on the head of the state named Syria, because I highly doubt if this state will not join the list of states like Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. I'm not so sure that the Druze in the south will not try to resume the autonomy which they enjoyed until August of 1925, when the French imposed on them joining the Syrian state. So definitely fragmentation of the state is a good possibility to look at Syria in the future, and now look for a leader. What do I mean leader? Leaders you will need in plural, because every district, every place will need its own leadership, and the world will have to deal with many or some states or entities which will emerge after Syria, actually as a state, will finish its life. I'm sorry to have to leave in 15 minutes. I have to start a lesson in another university in Bar Ilan. Thank you very much for listening, and I leave it with you.
So let's continue the round, and then I'll ask you to refer to the question. So we had a question regarding the U.S. Policy. Yes, please.
I have two questions on issues that I don't thoroughly understand. One is related to the economic situation in Syria.
To the
The economic situation.
economic situation, yes.
If you can tell us about the daily life today in Syria, and Eyal, you mentioned that the middle class and the upper middle class didn't join the rebels for
Yeah.
their own partisan reasons. That means that all the crises going around, apparently these crises didn't affect them yet. And so it's going to be very, very difficult if the middle class and the upper middle class are still retaining the support to Assad and the regime. I think it's going to be very, very difficult to oust it. So one issue is really the economy of Syria, how it's affecting all the clusters within Syria. And the second issue is relating really to the leadership. If you can say something, because we know there is also, I met in Washington, the political leadership, the Syrian leadership in the United States that are speaking, Skyping every day to the rebels, the so-called rebels, or some of the rebels, some faction of the rebels inside Syria. You can say something about the split between the outside and the inside leadership. If it's going to be some sort of a consolidated effort within Syria to fight them, what's role is going to play?
Okay. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Rachel Abraham from Jerusalem Online News. I wanted to know what the speakers think is the best way to approach the Syria humanitarian crisis while at the same time preventing Islamists from coming to power.
Okay, yes, please.
I have, and I can go last, because I have 6 questions, they're very specific. Anybody could take their pick, and I have
Okay.
clarification.
Yeah, please. No, I mean,
Thank you.
that's your turn.
I know
Somebody-
you talked regarding,
Okay.
I know you talked regarding the rebels. My questions, how much territory does al-Nusra Front specifically control and is successfully holding? How many cities with key transportation routes do they successfully have locked down? I understood, and I just seek clarification on this because I know it's a very, very fluid situation. Al-Nusra, I understood, was being very strengthened by defectors from the Free Syrian Army. And I also understood, and I need clarification for al-Nusra Front? And then finally, my last two questions are, I would say, strategically connected. Has there been any strategic coordination between the al-Nusra Front specifically and any of the Sinai groups? And we do see what could possibly be a disintegration process over here with Syria. Do we see, looking at the broader scope of the weak states and failing states, an amalgamation of states where we may be actually staring down a caliphate?
Okay, so I suggest you this order. You want to come here or you will?
No.
Yeah, okay. So go ahead.
I'll refer to two issues. One, the relationship that you've asked, and we discussed it yesterday, regarding the potential collaboration and reinforcement between the would-be Jihadi emirate, whatever, in Sinai and Syria. We know that there is a kind of movement between Sinai and Syria. It's not exactly well defined how many, when, how, but there are indications that, especially what I mentioned yesterday, less from Sinai, more from inside Egypt, so they can go from Sinai into Egypt and from the vicinity of Marsa Matruh take off and join the jihadists in Syria. This is one element which is a cause of concern. Regarding the humanitarian and also what Aaron described as the dawah activity by Jabhat al-Nusra and so like within the rebels, in the jihadi rebels in Syria, well, again, we are witnessing the same process of dawah and jihad that happened in Afghanistan, that what happened in Bosnia Herzegovina, and this is the Islamic NGOs. So this issue also has to be carefully monitored, whereas in one hand we call upon the moderate countries, moderate, light or real moderate like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to join the efforts, but in addition, traditionally they infuse also assistance through the NGOs, like the IRO, the Islamic International Relief Organization, the Muslim World League, into crisis zones. The IRO has started to operate refugees camps in Lebanon. So far, so good. The question is whether they will be involved through the Turkish border and infuse also assistance to the northern part of Syria and other parts, because their infusion of assistance is always the infusion of the Wahhabi Jihadi ideology. So with the money comes also the radicalizations. To make a long story short, I think that the humanitarian crisis in Syria should be very carefully monitored by all parties involved, including the US, to make sure that they do not make the same mistakes as happened in Afghanistan and afterwards in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and so on. So there is a potential problem.
Just real quickly, a couple of questions that were asked. One was, should the U.S. just back Assad? I don't see any possibility of that. We may limit involvement, but we're not going to. The United States is not going to back the Assad regime, and I don't think anyone else is. So if he falls, he ends up falling. The real question, and then you said, well, what's the difference between chemical warfare, killing's killing? Yes and no. There's a couple of versions of thinking through this. One is that there's a little device you can buy in the United States. It's about this big. You put it on your floors, and it's called a roach motel. And you let the roaches run in, and they die. And I think there are some analysts who have said, look, let them kill each other. Having said that, the issue will be couched in the international community and with the United States as non-involvement in the Civil War, But whether or not the world and civilized nations of the world will stand against the use of weapons of mass destruction or particularly ugly weapons that have a moral sense to them and that so many countries of the world have outlawed. And I think that that is where the political argument will go. I think that eventually that will be the issue of the day for a while. I don't think it will solve the problems of the Civil War, as was just pointed out by the chairman. Last thing is real quick on the humanitarian issue. I mean, I think there are a lot of issues here. One is the humanitarian issues that Yona just mentioned outside the country, refugee camps, this sort of thing, support of NGOs to help out. But inside the country, it's a completely different issue. Because a question about the only way that you can solve humanitarian issue inside the country is to control the country. And in order to control the ground, then you have a question of at what cost and by whom. And I don't think there's a lot of energy for that. And maybe the prevention of Assad's use of chemical weapons is a humanitarian issue in and of itself.
Regarding Jabhat al-Nusra and if they are in control of any territory, I think the thing one has to understand about what's going on in Syria and in the north and the east is that there is no one group that is necessarily qualitatively stronger than the other, and therefore one of the biggest ironies is that even though the opposition is quite fractured politically, on the battlefield many fighting forces work together. And as a result, in the areas that have been liberated in villages as well as the major cities, you don't have one group just running it. You have a multitude of groups. The key areas that Jabhat al-Nusra are in are Aleppo, Al-Raqqa, and Deir ez-Zor governorates. They also have some presence in other areas of the country, but those areas are not liberated, or if they are liberated, they're controlled more by other groups. And they usually work in a coalition with other groups like the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, which is also an al-Qaeda group. They're also with Ahrar al-Sham, which is more of a Salafi organization focused solely on Syria, but still want an Islamic State. Then you also have Sukar al-Sham, which is also a Salafi organization that wants to have an Islamic State in Syria. And then you have other Islamist organizations like Liwa al-Tawhid, Liwa al-Islam, and Kitab al-Faruq, who are more, it's hard to necessarily define specifically what type of Islamism they are since they go back and forth. But these are the main Islamist organizations essentially, and they work a lot together. But then they also work with a lot of the local councils as well because they need support on the ground as well. And the local councils most of these individuals are not Islamists. Most of them are more so nationalists, or they're more concerned with their own town and village, and they're more, they want to help out what's going on there and protect it, and it's less ideological. So you do have a lot of mixing going on, and that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges as it relates to why I think the Obama administration, as well as others, are apprehensive about potentially arming the rebels, because what we saw already is last December, when the Croatian weapons went in, it was supposed to only go to so-called moderate forces in the south, but within a month, you already saw these weapons in the hands of Jabhat al-Nusra, because these two guys do share supplies and work together a lot. And also, when we saw the designation of Jabhat al-Nusra as a terrorist organization in December 2012, nobody in the opposition condemned it. They thought it was a terrible decision by the United States because they thought they're an important part of the opposition, and that the real terrorists was the Assad regime. And even though Jabhat al-Nusra in April 2013 reaffirmed their bay'ah, or allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri and Al-Qaeda Central, still nobody said anything. So I think that it's a lot more complicated on the ground than what the media talks about in terms of there being good guys and bad guys. I think there's people just trying to survive in many ways. So it's very complex.
Okay. Few short comments coming back to the point you raised. I mean, if you look at the map, I mean, the areas in red, it doesn't mean that it's under the control of the rebels. It means that there is armed activity or rebel activity. But as I pointed out, they took over villages, some small cities, one major city, but there is no anything above local council, the local council of this city, or they were failed to establish a government or an administration that will take over the entire region. There are changes in the sense that, you know, one unit can one day affiliate with this group, the other day they can decide that they want to go to a Nusra because a Nusra can supply them with money. I mean, it's quite clear that most of the Syrians, and let me remind you the figures, I mean, 300,000 people are fighting there, only 10,000 do belong to the extremists who are coming outside the country. The Syrians see them as, you know, their supporters. They have one cause to fight with Bashar. Once Bashar is gone, of course, this is a different story. And we can see it in northern Syria, where they were able to gain control over a wide region, and immediately they start fighting with each other. Assad is gone, so the local Syrians start fighting with these people, making the Kurds, the Kurds are fighting the extremists, but they are not fighting the Free Syrian Army, making the clear, I mean, they are not Syrian. Now, as for the economy is, of course, paralyzed, and still we have to remind ourselves that, you know, even before the revolution, 40% of the houses, there were no running water or electricity. So for many Syrians, it's not a dramatic change. 40% were peasants who didn't take part in the national economy anyhow, but had their autarky market and economy. So many were not influenced. Of course, the big cities, the middle class, but the regime can provide the minimum requirement, food, energy, and what is important, he still pays the salaries of almost 1 million employees in the civil service and in the army. Once he will run out of money, but that's not the case. It's very interesting to find out that although Syria is witnessing a terrible crisis, the rate of the Syrian pound, I mean, before the revolution started, it was 50 to $1. Now it's 250 to $1. Of course, it's dramatic, but not as dramatic as you can. And you know why? Because who helped the Syrian government to balance and to maintain this rate? The dollars which Qatar and Saudi Arabia is giving the rebels, and they, of course, buy. In some of the cases, they continue to buy from the government, and there are local arrangements on the local basis, you know, food, energy, the Syrian cellular company, and belong to Rami Makhlouf, the cousin of the president, but still, you know, people enjoy services with electricity in areas under the control of the rebel. They pay for the company, so you see how this goes, but not for a long time. Now, as for the leadership, there are those who travel from one hotel to another, have no attachment to the reality on the ground. I mean, we have to remember that what happened in Syria was spontaneous emergence of local gangs. Now, these local gangs are important when we speak of a war. When the war is coming to an end, I have my doubt whether these people can really play a role in future Syria. If the war comes to an end, many of them will go back to their villages, and what we'll see, the traditional pillars of the Syrian society, the middle class, the upper middle class, the notables who are still there, some opposition leader will come back and may play a role, but right now they have no I mean, they travel from one place to another, but have no real influence on what is happening inside Syria. Okay, let's continue. Yes, please.
Question for the two colonels. Jonathan, you spoke about unsupervised arms supplies to the rebels. Footnote, today is 9/11. It's 1 year exactly since the murder of the American ambassador in Benghazi. What was he doing in Benghazi on 9/11? He was there having a secret meeting with the Turkish ambassador on covert supplies of weapons and arms from Libya via Turkey to the rebels. One of the ships, as you all forgot the day, was intercepted, but they're not allowed to continue the journey. Would you, and also for Colonel Brown, consider these covert arms supplies patronized by America between Libya and the rebels unsupervised or supervised arms supplies to the rebels at that time?
But maybe we'll pick more questions. Yes, please.
I'm writing. My name is Johannes Gerloff. I'm writing for German and Czech media. I'd like to know about two groups, Christians and the Palestinians in Syria. Where do they find themselves in this conflict? Do they have a clear side to take with? What are their options, their choices, their future? Yesterday, I think it was in the media that Ma'alula fell to the rebels. What does that mean for the people living there?
Yes, please.
I have one, sorry, my name is Leonie, I'm a journalist from the Netherlands. I have one question for Mr. Brown, two for Mr. Fighel. Mr. Brown, how big is Israel's influence on U.S. decisions concerning Syria? I mean, I guess Israel doesn't want the U.S. to arm the rebels, but it happens anyway. So, about this Israeli influence? And for Mr. Fighel, how good is Israeli intelligence on Syria's chemical weapons? Now there's a Russian proposal to maybe monitor or disarm the chemical stockpiles. Can we use Israeli intelligence? Is it the best in the world, or how good is this? And second, if there will be a U.S. attack on Syria and there will be a Syrian attack on Israel, how big is this chance of retaliation, and what are the dangers for Israeli citizens?
Okay, you want to? Yes, please.
Okay, let's go ahead and start answering a couple of these. One is the question about what happened in Benghazi, the covert arms. So I don't have any personal knowledge about what's going on with the covert arms, but I would say this, that we can call it supervised or not. Obviously, there's probably an influence by Saudi particularly as to who to give things to. And as Aaron pointed out a second ago, the truth is that once it gets on the ground, unless you're there to control it, it's unsupervised. I mean, you can give it to somebody, but it's essentially unsupervised once it goes into the country. And the ability for anyone to control that without being there is, I don't want to say farcical, but it's certainly not very good. And I don't think there's any control once it arrives in the country. Of course, that's the main concern. As far as Israeli influence on the American political system and the decisions of the United States policy, I mean, look, this is what I would say. Number one, the United States, from a government standpoint and from a population standpoint, is a strong support of Israel. This is the best ally that the United States has in the Middle East. However, as we all know in this room, or regardless of where you sit here or in the United States, that varies in terms of the support, one from administration to administration, and doesn't always dictate what American policy is. Allies sometimes disagree with each other, and I think that in some ways our interests certainly align in this case. I don't think that there are a lot of analysts on either side of the ocean here that really is convinced that we know the best answer to this, and the truth is there are no fully palatable answers, and all of the answers require compromises and difficulties that we may regret if we follow those paths. And I think that Israel continues to have a strong voice because we want to know what Israel thinks, and because you live in the neighborhood. And we are very concerned, I think, about the proximity of Israel to Syria. And so you have a stronger voice there. If this was happening in the middle of Central Asia, we probably wouldn't be having the same discussion because of the proximity to Israel in the first place. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that Israel wants will be dictated to American policy either.
Yoni?
Regarding arming the rebels, I'll be much more dramatic. I think that we don't learn from history, or the US doesn't learn from history. Sorry for being critical. I think it's a mistake. I think the lessons from Afghanistan, the lessons from Bosnia-Herzegovina show that this was a mistake. And the same pattern and the same Pavlovian reaction continues into Syria. We are not involved, but we are committed, and all this play underground and covered. And I think it's a mistake. It will be a blow-up in the Americans' face, the Israeli face, that even maybe the Syrian face. Regarding Palestinians, I'm sure that Professor Zisser also can speak about it, but I would say that still there are two organizations. I'm not speaking about the Palestinian population in general, which mainly are concentrated in some of the refugee camps and the other places, but regarding terrorist organizations, we should monitor very carefully two organizations. The PFLP General Command, Ahmad Jibril on one hand, it can be a proxy that the regime can use if the regime will survive and have any intentions of retaliation against Israel is one possibility. And the Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These are two elements, and the involvement of Iran in directing the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which they have the presence in, maybe I forgot someone, so Professor Zisser can add. Regarding the question of intelligence on Syria, I would just say roughly and generally that I think that the level of intelligence that Israel has on Syria is good. And about retaliation, if Syria will attack, so again, I think that let's see and wait.
Okay. Okay. Ma'alula was mentioned here. This is a Christian town. Now, let me remind you what the Maronite Patriarch of Lebanon, Patriarch Rai, said 2 years ago while meeting Sarkozy. You know, the Maronite Church was always a bitter enemy of the Ba'ath regime of the end of the Assad dynasty. And he said, you know, you should support Bashar. First of all, he's a reformer, good guy. I mean, poor guy. What can you expect of him to do in a country like Syria? But he said the Arab Spring may turn to be a genocide for the Christians in the region, and that's what we see in Syria. They are disappearing. I mean, many already left, many are living, especially in places which fall under the control of the rebels. Churches were attacked, Christian clerics were attacked by Islamists, not by the Syrian rebels, or by the Islamists, and Sharia was implemented, so no future for the... And this was the last largest Christian community in the Arab East. The Palestinians in general are in distress. I mean, they can't go to Lebanon because Lebanon doesn't allow, also Jordan doesn't allow Palestinians to enter Lebanon because the Lebanese don't want them to stay there. So Syrians can come and become refugees in Lebanon, but not Palestinian. Many had to leave the Palestinian refugee camp in Yarmouk or other places. So this is really a humanitarian tragedy, but it's part of a larger humanitarian tragedy in Syria. Ari.
I'd like the question is addressed to whoever wants to answer. There's an ongoing debate if the falling of the Assad regime is good or bad for Israel in the West, and those who claim it's better for him to remove the regime say that there is an exaggerated presence of the Al-Qaeda forces in the media, or in other words, the media are saying that there is increasing amount of soldiers or Al-Qaeda affiliates within Syria, but it's exaggerated. So I'd like to know if you feel that this is the actual truth, if it's the media is exaggerating the Al-Qaeda affiliates presence in Syria, and if from your personal knowledge, do you know what is the percentage of those people involved out of the various groups, Free Syrian Army and the rest of the groups who are the Syrian opposition?
Okay. Yes, please.
Dr. Karman published yesterday in Media Bachmanot a map of what Israel seems as the chemical weapons factories and areas where they're being stored in Syria. And Morty was saying that he saw the Syrian state being broken up into different regimes of 5 different sects. Does anyone here have any concept of who might then be in control of the different chemical and biological weapons that are in Syria? Would it be broken up into these different sects, or would it be somehow in the hands of one particular group? What's the threat there?
Yes, please.
Is there anything going on legally against those countries that supply the materials to make the Syrian gas in Europe? European companies?
Other questions?
Was it,
Yeah, please.
Could you just, what were you looking for in terms of supplying what to Syria?
They supply the Syrian gas has to be made.
Yesterday it was published that British companies supply the Syrians with some, yeah. Yeah.
The materials in order that your Syrian
Yeah.
gas can be made. Now, they knew it up front
Yeah.
what the end result would be when they supplied the materials.
Yeah.
Are they free legally, or are they accountable?
Yeah.
Well, you know, when Putin gets put in for the Nobel Peace Prize, you know, so you're talking about, you know, you're talking about world powers, you know, so Putin will be put in for the Nobel Peace Prize, but Russia will have for decades supported the chemical munitions growth in the Syrian armed forces.
So it's mainly Russia. Yeah. Yes, please.
Just one quick question. My name is Herzliya, and I work here at Naval. I'm addressing my question to Yona, because since we all know the connection between Naval and afterwards the terror activity that is promoted by that agenda, I would like to know what you actually offer in terms of your statement about monitoring the humanitarian crisis in Syria. What do you in particular suggest?
Yes, please. Yes.
All these jihadists and so on are coming in from Europe, etc. What's the part? I mean, is there a recruiting office someplace? Do they go through mosques? Do they go through? I mean, how are they going to do? Any of the authorities in the West or other countries, are they trying to keep tab on this or to check it?
Okay.
I can answer both of their questions.
Please stop.
So in terms of the percentage of Al-Qaeda fighters in the opposition, I think it's important to note that even though the Al-Qaeda-linked groups, Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, might not be the majority of fighters, maybe up to 30% if we're being liberal about the estimates, but they are the best fighters. So we may have to, not talk about necessarily how many overall rebels there are, because we have to be talking about who are the most effective on the battlefield. And the most effective ones are the Islamists, including the Al-Qaeda-linked groups. So I think we should understand that. In terms of the foreign fighters, in the European context, what we've seen over the last decade is that there have been indigenous movements with names like Sharia for the UK, Sharia for Belgium, Sharia for what have you, and you've been able to, there's been these grassroots movements that have popped up, and therefore you essentially have crops of potential recruits already there and ready to go, and therefore in many ways they're using some of these individuals in these groups to send them off to Syria because they want to fight there. They don't necessarily tell them specifically, you, sir, you need to go fight in Syria, but the language that they use when they do lectures, they make it that somebody themselves goes up to a recruiter and then wants to go. So they want it to be the person's decision. In terms of in the Arab countries, I actually just was in Tunisia and had the opportunity to speak to a Tunisian that fought in Syria for about 8 months since his return. And he was saying that part of the process was that you had rich businessmen either in Tunisia or in the Gulf who were helping fund passports as well as travel from those countries. And then they'll go into Turkey and then into Syria. So you have this whole facilitation network going on between different individuals within the region in terms of business individuals, in terms of facilitators that have been working in the Al-Qaeda networks going back to the Iraq War, because many of them have just been reactivated since during the Iraq War, unlike now where the logistics network is in southern Turkey for the jihadists. During the Iraq War, it was in eastern Syria. So it's more or less in the same area of operations, and therefore many of the networks have just been reactivated since we did see in Iraq, in addition to the Saudis being the most in Iraq, as we do see in Syria also, that North Africans had a large percentage as well, especially the Libyans and then Tunisians as well. So that's sort of a little part of it as it relates to the recruitment and facilitation of these individuals.
Just real quick, Dr. Newman and others have spoken about the difference today is really the online radicalization. And those, there are these transmission belts from various places, particularly in Europe. There are big expat communities, Pakistani in the UK. A lot of these folks are going to various countries, as Aaron pointed out, and they go in through madrasas and get religious training as well as military training. Pakistan was mentioned at the conference this week. And then, they've been going into Iraq for years through some of these same transmission belts, and some of these, as Aaron pointed out, are just being regenerated, and they're very difficult to control. The truth is that most Western governments are not cracking down on who's looking at what sites and whether or not everybody, is going to any one particular place out of the country. And so it's difficult to control, and that's one of the changes in the modern day. The other thing real quick, is I think, as good as our intelligence is, and Yanni's pointed out that they think they know pretty well, but even at the conference this weekend, Thomas Hegghammer, said you get about 5,000 jihadist fighters. I heard on the panel this morning they had 10,000 fighters. Aaron's got a lot of good intel about, particulars of particular groups, but I don't think we know exactly how many jihadist fighters there are. And that's a big discrepancy, honestly. And the other thing is that, what would happen with the chemical stockpiles? The truth is no one knows. And that's one of the problems. And, of course, so if we allow or if we assist in overthrowing the regime, this is a strategy is not about guarantees. It's about probabilities. And so, and history is replete with predictions of governments that thought they were going to get one outcome out of doing particular things that have not happened historically. And this is the problem with escalation and changes once war ensues. And so I think it's a big question as to what would happen with those stockpiles.
Yoni?
2 remarks. The good intelligence I refer to Syria, not to the Syrian rebels. I mean, we know Syria for so many years. Regarding the rebels, I'm not sure that Israel is, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the Israeli intelligence community, not anymore at least. I think the recruitment and the flow of jihadists is very much of a concern regarding the Western authorities. I know for a fact that they are very much monitoring this phenomenon in and out. They are trying to analyze, to build a chain of recruitment. Not only trying, they even know in some parts of Europe. The facilitators in Europe, not only in the Arab world, as Aaron mentioned, and there is a system. At the end of the day, we are speaking a very known system. They will not invent something new. We need to search for the system that we already know from Hadi Jihadi fronts. and to be adaptive to the new reality. But the concept is the same, the ideology is the same, their goals are the same, and also, so there is a need to adapt and to search. But of course, Germany, Italy, all European countries are very much concerned and are doing things about it. Regarding the humanitarian assistance, what I'm just trying to drive the attention is that there is a need for a scrutiny, not to avoid humanitarian assistance, of course, in Syria, but mainly in the borders, because now it's in the borders. Inside Syria, it's totally impossible to conduct any humanitarian, but to be much more with a scrutiny ability to vet who are the organizations, what they are penetrating besides money, food, assistance, and make sure that even if it is the IRO, to see if this is what they bring with them. Because I didn't see any other, at least we are speaking about the Kuwaiti, the Qatari, the Saudi humanitarian organizations. We didn't see the US aid coming and taking over, or other, or UNRWA, or ANERA, or I don't know, all kinds of organizations which are led by the UN. So what I'm just saying, that we need to learn from past history, which is not far away, and make sure that not through this humanitarian activity, all this poison will be injected in the uninvolved civilian population in Syria.
Thank you. Well, yes, please.
I have two questions. One is, apparently there's so many splintered, small groups of terrorist organizations that are apparently they're not strong enough to take and hold and occupy territory in Syria. What's the likelihood that they will be able to come together in a cohesive manner to be able to control large enough areas of Syria to dominate those regions? The other question is, we talk about all the groups that are fighting against Assad, but we also have terrorist organizations fighting on behalf of Assad. Can you address those, please?
Somebody wants to? Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about the second question, because I just co-authored a piece with Matt Levin in the CTC Sentinel about Hezbollah's role in Syria. So essentially, on the Assad side, you see a similar phenomenon as we saw in the Iraq War last decade, where you had Shia Iranian proxies who are fighting against the Sunni population, essentially. So as we've seen more publicly in recent months, Hezbollah has entered the fray, though they more or less have been involved since the beginning of the conflict on the side of the Assad regime. Now they're actually all in terms of not just in an advisory or training role, but sending in their best fighters. And they lost some of their best fighters in Qusair a few months ago. They probably lost more fighters in the Qusair battle than they had in the 2006 war with Israel. So they took a beating. That being said, they've also been able to stand up a lot of other militias to help out the Assad regime. Most of them are Iraqis who are part of Iraqi Shia militias such as Asab al-Haq, as well as Katab Hezbollah and the Badr organization, among other smaller ones. And so now you have these sort of front organizations such as Liwa Abu Fadl al-Abbas, and a few others that I can't remember off the top of my head, but they essentially have been in charge of fighting specific battles. So most of them are in and around the Damascus area, because it's obviously the capital and they want to secure it, but also because there's the site of Zainab Shrine there, which is a holy Shia place of worship, and therefore it's got a very important role historically for the Shia, as well as there's also historical operational links related to the site of Zainab for Hezbollah and their operations abroad. And then, as I noted, Hezbollah has fought in Qusair, and then there's another battalion called Saida Shuhada, who's been fighting in and around the Aleppo area, which are mainly Iraqis as well. So they've been entering more and more Shia fighters into the battle over the past few months. It's difficult to know the specific numbers, but I would say in total, adding Hezbollah and the Iraqi Shias at most, it's 5,000, but it's likely a little less than that. And it's definitely helped assist the Assad regime because it looked a few months ago that there was a lot of momentum for the rebels, and the really public push by Hezbollah to get involved in the conflict and stopgap in Qusair, I think changed the game in some respects. So, not just terrorist organizations with the rebels, but you also have it on the side of the Assad regime. And you could say this also with the Kurds as well, since there are some PKK elements that are fighting in the Kurdish areas. So you have terrorists everywhere.
One quick comment before you go. I think that the likely, today the argument is all about this vote and whether or not the U.S. is going to get involved in the chemical weapons. But this war is going to go on for a long time. The reason is, as Professor Zisser said, one, you have the state that's in large measure still intact and powerful. And two, you've got all these splinter groups and they're not strong enough to control the country. But here's the deal. Even if the Assad regime was overthrown today, there would continue to be a war over who was going to control Syria for a long time to come.
And this exactly brings me to the question, what can unify them? From our experience in the Arab world, a bigger enemy can unify them. So maybe it's a role for the U.S. to make a foot on the ground, a mistake foot on the ground, to unify all the factions against the common enemy. So they will be fragmented, and they will live ever after happily fragmented. I just want one comment regarding groups that can serve Assad in retaliation or terrorist activity. I just want to drive an attention to a potential that does exist. If there will be some kind of measures against Assad, traditionally, and both we are too old to remember that Assad is a state-sponsored terrorist. And Assad can revive some mechanisms that were dormant, like the reactivation of the PFLP, General Command, Jibril. Not only against Israel, Jibril was committing also overseas attacks against Israeli, and it can be in the future, American targets in the name of Assad, directly or indirectly. Assad is enjoying, and this is also what Eyal says, he has the embassies around the world, the Syrian embassies. And in many embassies still there is a presence of the Air Force intelligence, led in the past by Al-Huli, the notorious Al-Huli, but even now, Jamil. And they are acting like they are not only giving information about aerial information. This intelligence body of the Air Force intelligence is acting like the CIA, the MI6, the Mossad style, meaning gathering information, activating and dispatching explosives and on targets. And we remember from 86, there was an attempt by the Syrians to gun down by explosive an El Al airliner coming from New York through London to Tel Aviv, but it can be also against American airliners in Europe. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a potential that if Assad will feel that he can activate those capabilities, if he will be interested in activating, I'm not saying that it is feasible, but it's a potential development that should also be taken into consideration.
Yeah. Just one more comment about, today is the anniversary of 9/11. I don't think that today there's any hope that the United States will be involved in ground forces in Syria, mainly because, again, back to an earlier question, what influence does Israel have on American politics? A lot. But that's not what's going to drive the decision in the United States today. What's going to drive it is domestic politics. Domestic politics has no will. Capability, yes. Intent and will for another ground intervention in the Middle East, no. Unless there is some form of another 9/11 or something that occurs that directly attacks the United States, and then all bets are off because there's a element there that could be re-raised and would probably galvanize American will to do something different.
Thank you. Well, Assad is a great leader. He's the builder of modern Syria. That's what Ehud Barak, I mentioned him, And Bill Clinton said about Hafez al-Assad, Assad the father, in late 1999 when they wanted to achieve peace agreement with him. Now, when I think about it, he was a great leader, not because he didn't use chemical weapon against the rebels during the struggle against the Islamists in the 70s, probably not because he killed only 30,000 of his own people, unlike but because he won. And as I said before, I'm not sure, but Bashar has at least 50%, I think personally more, chances to win this struggle for Syria. Once he wins and the peasants get back to the villages and Turkey and Qatar cut the financial support, he will have no problem regaining control over the country, putting the money not in the economy, but in what ensure him the victory, more weapon system. And then there will be a long line in front of his palace of European. They will be the first, Americans, Israelis, to welcome the winner and to make business with him because Syria is a pivotal player in the Middle East. But long road to Damascus, and let's stay where we are. Thank you very much for a wonderful panel, and thank you all.